Well, good afternoon, Muskie fans. We're here at the Reaker Cast. Jim Reaker and Jeff Zink talking Muskies basketball. Not a great week for the Muskies, but we're going to talk about all the highs and lows as we go through. Jim, the other day on our Trogcast about NCAA men's, you were a little under the weather. Feel a little better today?
We're getting there, Jeff. You know, looks like winter's setting in. I just saw there's a weather alert for tomorrow. Extreme cold temperatures.
Weather alert. That means that Kroger's will be swamped with people getting their milk and bread in case there's a dusting of snow here in Cincinnati. Well, let's get right to it, Jim. Not a very good week for the Muskies. 0-2. We talked about it last week. Tough Baylor team who's so far been the surprise of the season. So not a huge surprise that they lost there. But last night's game against Buffalo, and you put the two games together, they lost to the Buffs. I said Buffalo. It's Colorado Buffaloes against Colorado. They lost to the Buffs 68-66. But I think these two games have shown some cracks in the facade that might bring a little worry to Muskie fans.
Well, I went out this morning, and the sky has not fallen. If you read some of the chat boards this morning, of course, I've been around and followed Muskie basketball for 30 years, and not unusual. Oh, we're no good. We shouldn't even be in the top 25. What's wrong with this team? Coach Mack doesn't know what he's doing. Let me tell you this. The sky has not fallen. This team is okay. One of the fact or kind of a situation I was going to talk about the other day in our Trogcast that I forgot about was December 7th, which was yesterday, correct?
Yes.
Last year in 2015 on December 7th in the Pearl Harbor Classic, Villanova went out and played Oklahoma. The final score of that game was Oklahoma won at 78-55, so they defeated the Villanova Wildcats by 23 points on December 7th. I don't know if you recall, but on April 2nd in the national semifinals, Villanova and Oklahoma met once again. And this time Villanova won 95-51, a 44-point favor for them, and that's a 67-point swing. So it's December 8th. We're okay.
Well, yeah, I would agree with you on that point, that it's not, as we've talked about before, it's not April, and it's December. And I'm not throwing the team out the window by any step of imagination, but that doesn't mean there aren't cracks in the facade. I mean, when you look at a team that led both these teams late in the second half and couldn't close it, they out-rebounded both teams, yet you look at some of the holes, and I'll just you can comment on here in a minute. I mean, shooting just 31% of the field against Baylor, 37.7 against Colorado, and if you look at their three-point shooting, I mean, Blewett was 6 for 13 last night, which is great, but the rest of the team was just 1 for 14, and their free throw shooting just 57 against Baylor and 62%. So yeah, we've got a lot of time, but it still makes you wonder, what's going on right now? I'm not going to go into they should be out of the top 25 and Mac should be fired and all that, because that's all crap and we both know it. But there are some things the team needs to address, especially before heading into the Big East Conference season.
Well, you are correct there. And you initially, way back when this all started, you were the one that cited the free throw challenge. And I think they're shooting about 70%. That's a little bit lower than you would want for a high-caliber team. But here's also, and I don't know if you saw any of the game or listened to it last night, they missed some very big free throws late in the game. So, their percentage, it is lower than you'd want it to be. It's not horrible, but it's when they're missing free throws. And it's also, the problem is a lot of the free throw misses are coming from the big three underneath, O'Mara, Gaston, and Jones. Against Baylor, they were 1 for 8, and last night they were 2 for 7. And those guys are going to get fouled a lot, especially maybe late in the game. So that has to be fixed. And the other problem, I think, and it reared its head a little bit yesterday. I thought they kind of had it fixed, but it was just turnovers and being careless with the ball at key times.
And that's my point exactly. There's just cracks there. It doesn't mean that the wall's going to fall down, but Blewett, he was the same thing. He's hitting from threes, nobody else is, but shooting from the field in the 30%, and overall, around 70-15, but the past two games, little holes. That's just not a hallmark of the Xavier team that relies on defense and smart play. So we'll just have to see if this was, an off week on the road against a couple of tough teams, or if it is cause for concern. Like you, I think the Muskies are going to be there come tournament time, but it does give one a little pause as to how that's all going to come together.
Yeah, just a couple quick notes. I look back through the scoring. With 10:32 remaining in the second half against Baylor, the score was tied 51-51. So, again, and they did some things really, really well, rebounding, which was a concern coming into the season because of the new post players. In that game, they out-rebounded Baylor, who is a big team. They had a 7-footer and a 6'9" power forward playing there, but they out-rebounded them 47-35 and had 18 offensive rebounds. So, that was a positive there. But then they went on from the 11:15 mark to the 3:36 mark, so about an 8.5-minute mark. They allowed Baylor to go on a 21-2 run, and that's pretty much what finished them in that game. And again, last night, kind of the same thing. They actually, at one point, they were ahead in the second half. Let's see what I have here. At the 12:20 mark, they were up by 8 points. And with 8:41 remaining in the game, they were still up by a point, and then they again went on a drought. At one point, they had a 10-minute drought in there where the Buffaloes had a 15-0 run. So, again, there was a lot of good things happen. But, yeah, you have to be concerned. Part of it, I think, is, they need to sometimes settle down and just try to get a basket, because you know how basketball is so much of a run game that when things are going bad, shots don't fall, and they need to go more to the inside to make sure they get a few points and get things turned around.
And, of course, it always hurts when you've got somebody named for your university adding to the pain with Xavier Johnson, who threw in 18. And also, who knows what the emotional lift was, because they did have that moment of silence for their Heisman Trophy. It was basketball, and it's been a while, 94, but the announcement that Rashaan Salam had passed away earlier that day. So you just never know how those things might influence what's going on. But
Go ahead.
Waiting for you.
Well, I was just going to say another major positive, and I kind of thought this was coming, and it actually happened last night, was Rasheed Gaston was inserted into the starting lineup. I think through his play early on, he has shown that he's probably more of a force right now to be reckoned with than Sean O'Mara. And he had a great line. He almost had a double-double at halftime. He ended up with a double-double. And that's a key thing right there, because a lot of those guys weren't finishing underneath, but he ended up with 14 points, was the second leading scorer, I believe, last night, and had, I think, 11 rebounds. So I look for that to be a trend that will continue. But Sean O'Mara is going to be important too, because he's going to have to give him some minutes there. And Sean O'Mara, if you look at his career, he just keeps progressing. And I think next year you're going to see him as a senior will probably be the starter, and one of those in the line of like a Kenny Freeze just develops to a point where when he is a senior, he's going to be a great leader and a great post player.
That's all good points there. And that leads us to the next thing about what might be missing. Throwing somebody like Gaston in who wasn't getting a lot of minutes early due to injury. What do you hear about Miles Davis? Obviously, we could use his steady hand as a guard, and obviously his shooting touch. There's things being thrown out there. The university isn't really saying a lot. Did you get any scoop down there while you were at the Cintas Center about what's going on with Miles?
No, and you are exactly right, because I usually scour the bulletin boards, talk to fans, and they've kept it pretty much hush-hush, which I really give Xavier credit. It's a personal issue besides what is out there in the press because of the court proceedings. it probably is none of our business what's going on. I think it's actually kind of they've figured it out. They've gotten it right. Of course, college athletics has gotten to a point where some of these issues that haven't been addressed make the university look bad in the end. And I use Baylor as an excellent example with their football program, where obviously some things were going on there. Players weren't living up to the standards that the university, I'm sure, expected for them, and it ended up to be a big mess. I think it kind of comes back to, if you remember, I believe it was 2011 with the UC fight. And some people believe that maybe Xavier didn't punish some of those players enough that year. Then I think in a reaction to that, then a year or so later, Des Wells had an issue, and he was kicked out of the off campus, out of school actually, and transferred to Maryland. And then he was found to be not guilty of the charges, so it looked like the university had overreacted. So in this situation, I think they've done a very good job of just saying, hey, this is between Miles Davis and us. And we know what's going on. He knows what's going on. And when he's ready to be back, he will be back. But the one thing Chris Mack did mention the other day in a press conference, he pretty much, I think he was affirmative that Miles Davis will be back. And his only remark regarding a timeline was closer to the conference schedule, which, of course, begins at the end of December.
Well, I don't think anybody expected to see him back before the end of this semester, which, of course, goes through next week with their exams, and that's why we can move on. I mean, there's only one game on the schedule this week because of exams. They got a game on Saturday and then nothing until the following Saturday. But it is against Utah Saturday. It's going to be at 5:30 p.m. It's going to be on Fox. It is at home. What can you tell us about the Utes?
Well, the Utes, they lost Jacob Podol, I believe his name is pronounced. He was the 14th player taken in the NBA draft. They had a good season last year, but they are really in a rebuilding mode, and I think this should be a positive. It's going to be back in the Cintas Center. Say what you want, but both those last two games were played in pretty hostile environments. In fact, I thought the Colorado environment last night was even more hostile than Baylor. Baylor, I don't even know if the arena was full. Of course, their football team was playing at the exact same time, so that may have pulled some of the fans away from the basketball program. But it's going to be back at the Cintas Center. We have exams coming up next week, the Xavier campus does, so I'm sure there'll be a lot of students who want to take a break from studying over the weekend. Kind of a weird start time. It's a 5:30 tip, but I expect the fans to be there in full force. I expect the whole crowd. I expect to sell out, and I think Xavier will get back on the winning side. Back to Miles Davis a little bit. Again, it was interesting. I was in a establishment last night watching the game, and there were a couple guys sitting beside me who had Xavier gear on, so I assume they were fans. And when the loss was evident that they were not going to win that game, one of them said, "This is all Miles Davis' fault." And I'm thinking, no, you can't blame everything on him. I think in the end we may see this as a positive if he comes back and contributes to the team like I think he will, because some of the younger players have gotten his minutes early on, and I think they can contribute later in the season because of that experience. Here's the thing. I'm not even sure Miles Davis is at Xavier. I kind of get the feeling he's not even here. This is his fifth season. I believe he graduated last year, and so this is his fifth season because he redshirted his freshman year. Question is going to be, what kind of shape is he going to be in? How's the chemistry going to be fitting in with some of these new players? They have two transfers and two freshmen who are big contributors. But on the positive side, he knows the system. He knows Xavier. He knows Coach Mack. I would guess he's probably been, wherever he is, has been working out, knowing him to be as ready as he can be. But, how ready is he going to be? How many minutes can he play that first game? A lot of people were looking for Kaiser Gates to come back, and he's back, and he's doing okay. But, again, it's going to take him a while to get back into playing shape and, get back into the flow of things.
Yeah. I hear you. I'll be excited to see Kyle Kuzma from the Utes. He's one of those Flint, Michigan guys that they just seem to continue to crank out. And right now he's leading them in scoring, rebounding, and assists. and just a junior. So it'll be an exciting game tomorrow. I know you'll be down there, and we'll talk about it all next Thursday.
Well, one other thing, if you look at Utah's schedule, the only team they've played of a high Division I caliber is Butler, and Butler beat them by 9 points.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll get a chance to see what's going on there. Without much going on in the rest of the week, we thought we'd just take a look back, and we'll do this from time to time on the Razor Cast to former players and coaches, and we thought just to talk about a past era. We look back at the coaches, and we want to talk a little bit about Joe Meyer. That's a name you haven't heard because you're not a Xavier fan. It does take us back almost 100 years. Joe was the head basketball coach at Xavier from 1920 to 1933. Actually played basketball and baseball at Notre Dame and was a captain in both. And his record at Xavier, he was really the second coach. First coach only coached one game in 1919. That was Harry Gilligan. He was 94-52, and we'll talk about a lot of these other coaches, but that's the best winning percentage of all the Xavier coaches until you get to the X-Renaissance. It really started with Pete Gillen in 1985, and all those coaches that came to Coach Gillen in that. What's most interesting to me, Jim, in looking at a guy like Joe Meyer is this, and you've coached high school, and I have, so you know this. Not only was Coach Meyer the head basketball coach for those 14 seasons, and again came with a 644 winning percentage, 94-52. He was also Xavier's head football coach for 16 seasons and had a 656 record, and that's the best record of any Xavier football coach. Of course, Xavier no longer has football, but a coach lasted more than one season. And there was one year where he was also the head baseball coach. So can you imagine in this day and age a coach going after being able to even manage multiple sports in one university?
No, that just shows you how much college athletics have changed in the 100 years. I would say, was he the basketball coach? But he was the coach. And, if you look back at a lot of high schools, even up through the 1940s and 50s, they had one coach. Usually it was the PE coach, and he coached, if they had it, football in the fall, basketball in the winter, and baseball in the spring. So, that was kind of interesting. I looked at that and saw, actually, he continued on after he left Xavier, and actually, I believe in football. I think that was more what he was known for, as being a football coach. I believe he went to UC and coached for a few years in football there.
He did for 5 or 6 years until they had to stop the program due to World War II, and then Ray Nolding took over after the war. And he was 27, 16, and 3 UC, and also coached baseball for 3 or 4 years there. Didn't have as much success in the baseball avenue. And then after the war, he was the head of the Cincinnati Recreation Commission for 3 years. So quite a character. I mean, his death note was enough that it was given a death notice in the New York Times. So again, a different era, different time when he passed away in 1970, and we'll be looking back at, again, different coaches and different players to remind people of this long sports history. And you probably know this, Jim, but they're called the Musketeers now, but for over half of the time that Coach Meyer was the head basketball coach, the Xavier went by a different nickname. Do you know what that was?
Oh, I think you have me on that one.
Wouldn't take you far. And if you think of a football team in New Orleans, it'll help you out.
The Saints.
Yeah. Before we were the Musketeers, they were the Xavier University Saints. And
interesting.
They moved over.
Well, you got one on me. I got one for you today, though.
All right.
Trivia.
Fire away.
Well, made me think about this because Baylor, when we played Baylor, that was only the third time Xavier and Baylor had met. And then last night when they played Colorado, that was only the second time they had played Colorado. The only other time was back in 1998, and that was during, I think, a Puerto Rican tip-off, one of those exempt tournaments that come early in the season. So, Xavier's schedule is changing a lot, especially their non-conference schedule. And, again, that's what I want to, Muskie fans, if you've been around as long as I have been, these last two games were disappointing. but you just got to consider the caliber of schools and programs we are playing now compared to just even 10 years ago when we were starting to dominate the A-10. If you look at our non-conference schedule, we weren't playing Pac-10, SEC, ACC teams, and if you look at the schedule this year, we've played every major conference so far this year except, I believe, the Big Ten. So anyway, on to my trivia. I was thinking, so Xavier, they'd only played these schools a few times, made me think, obviously, to the other end, what university has Xavier played the most basketball games against? Got an answer for me, Jeff?
Oh, well, I always like those precise ones. You know, it's not like he's going to give me a span of 5 that I can get in there.
Well, I have the top 4, so.
Oh, well, the hard part there is it's obviously got to be a natural rival or an in-league rival where you're playing a lot, but because they've changed conferences several times, it's hard to remember who exactly they were at different times. But you also got to look back, back when Coach Meyer coached, they were independents, and who knows who they even coached. Let's see. Some logical guesses would be some of the people that they had in the A-10 that also came into the Big East under that. But I'll just throw it out there and say maybe somebody like Butler, which is a like-minded team.
They are not in my top 4, but that's a good guess, and you're thinking along the right lines. Again, think about teams that maybe have been in a couple conferences with them and are a natural rival. You're thinking along the right lines there.
Yeah, well, then I would think maybe somebody like Temple was in the A-10 with them a long time. No? 0 for 2?
Let me reinforce, this is your hint. Fierce rival. Hated rival. A couple of them along those. Actually, 3 of the top 4, I think, would almost fall into that category.
Oh. Well, the natural thing would be to say Cincinnati, but there were
Cincinnati is number 4 on the list with 77 games.
But I stayed away from them because there were many years when they didn't play each other. But if they're number 4, that's fantastic. And then maybe somebody like they still stand in the Big East in the smaller schools, like a Creighton or DePaul.
No, I'm going to have to give you the top 3. We'll start with number 3. This is the one that was a little bit surprising. I think they played early on a lot when they were both independent Catholic schools, and that is the University of Detroit. With 94 games. Number 2, just up the road a little bit, the Miami Redhawks. 97 games. And number 1, though, you're going to kick yourself, and this one is by far the number 1, 152 contests, because many years they played home and away and have been in 2 leagues together, not anymore, but the Dayton Flyers, 152 games with them and the Xavier Musketeers.
Yeah. Well, that's what's always neat, and that's one of the pluses and minuses of what's going on in sports today is some of those rivalries sort of fall by the way when they change conferences. But, yeah, and those schools you're talking about, like Miami and Dayton, it was also for travel purposes. You played the people closer to you because you didn't have the time to travel. Well, we'll be back next Thursday on the next Razorcast. If you get a chance, also catch our Trogcast, the 2 really old guys talking sports, which we do every Tuesday on NCAA men's basketball. A couple quick things to think about. I mean, the Indiana State must have had the spirit of Larry Bird yesterday, Larry's 60th birthday, and they were able to pull out the upset over number 16 Butler on this day in sports. Also, happy birthday to Dwight Howard. Doesn't have anything to do with NCAA men's as he skipped right to the NBA draft. But on a sad day, which is also sports related, it was on this day 36 years ago that they interrupted Monday Night Football, and Howard Cosell announced the death of John Lennon, who was shot in front of the Dakota in New York City. So lots of things there.
I do remember that evening. I was actually laying on my bed in a dorm room at Ball State University, and I always turned my clock radio on to play some music before I fell asleep, and they had interrupted that to announce that John Lennon had been shot. A very sad day in music history, which, I'm a big fan of also.
Exactly. Well, we'll say goodbye to all our fans. Goodbye, Jim. This is the Razorcast, and we'll see you, or actually you'll hear us next week on Thursday as we talk all about Xavier basketball.
Hang in there, Xavier fans. I think a win's coming on Saturday, and all will be righted. And remember, it's a long trip.
So we'll end as we always do with Go Muskies.
Go Muskies.